the series and our lineup of speakers that we have tonight and over the course of the next 5 weeks. This series ties into our gallery exhibition, Glories of the Kings, a jade suit for eternity, treasures of the Han Dynasty. For those of you who haven't seen this exhibition or would like to see it again, we're keeping it open late until 6:30 every night that we're having these lecture series. So we really encourage you to stop by and take a look or another look. I want to thank our trustees, Ingrid Ehrenberg and Yvonne Wong, for joining us here tonight. I also want to thank all of our members who are joining us this evening. If you're not a member and you're interested in attending more China Institute programming, getting discounts, access to exclusive offerings like our gallery previews, I definitely encourage you to become a member. Next week's talk will feature Michael Nyland of the University of California, Berkeley, who will look at the Roman and Han empires, who were roughly happened at the same time, and she'll be looking at them from a perspective of comparative archaeology. She's a really fascinating writer, scholar, speaker who's coming out here for this talk, so we're really excited about this talk. I also wanted to let you know next Tuesday, an upcoming event is we're going to have David Henry Huang here. He will be speaking about his upcoming Broadway revival and Butterfly. It's going to be directed by Julie Taymor and starring Clive Owen. So it's going to be a really kind of cool sneak peek at this production and the approach that they're taking to it. Lastly, I just want to thank everyone who helped put this series together. We had a lot of help, particularly Nancy Steinhardt, our friend at the University of Pennsylvania, who followed his domain advice. And now I want to introduce our speaker, Professor Yuan Qiu. Yuan Qiu is a professor of history and director of the Asian Studies program at Purchase College, State University of New York. Professor Yu has published many articles and book reviews on Chinese history and Chinese American history in professional journals. He is a dear and longtime friend of China Institute. He's been talking about it since the 90s. He's been with us lecturing, and so we're very happy to have him here tonight to launch this speaker series. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's a very generous introduction. It is my great pleasure to give this talk on Sima Qian and his book, 史记. When Sun Zhan invited me to give this talk, I did not hesitate for 1 second. Anyone invites me to talk about Sima Qian, I will do it, particularly for China Institute. We know that Sima Qian is seen and recognized as a great historian, a great writer, and a great thinker in China and in the world. And this is a portrait of Sima Qian in the traditional tongue. And because Chinese people are very proud of Sima Qian, Sima Qian's native tongue is very, very proud of Sima Qian. And in his native tongue, Hancheng, Shanxi, there is a Sima Qian square. It's a statue of Sima Qian. Over the time, there are events held there in celebrating Sima Qian's contribution to the Chinese culture. And of course, there's also a Sima Qian Park in Hancheng. There's a statue of Sima Qian there too. Now, of course, today we will mainly talk about Sima Qian's masterpiece, 史记, and this is in Chinese. And I have bring some copies of this. This is for Feng Chan Shu, and we will pass this around to take a look at this. But of course, we are talking about this in English, so mainly I will use the English translation of Burton Wilson. This pass this around. This is volume 2 here. This is an excellent, excellent English translation of 史记 in 2 volumes. Let's go over Sima Qian's life very, very briefly. He's a native of Hancheng, Shanxi. Was born in 1 145 BC, died either in 90 BC or 87 BC. We don't know the exact year he died. Please note that he lived in the time of Han Di, or Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu was born in 156 BC and he died in 87. So he lived a very long life of 71 years. And he also reigned for a very, very long time. He reigned from 140 to 87 BC, a total of 54 years. And Sima Qian lived in this time. His father is Sima Han, who died in 110 BC. He served as a grand historian, or Tai Si Ling, in the court of Emperor Wu. And he started collecting materials for writing a general history of China. But at that time, actually, he was trying to write a history of the world as he understood. Before his death, he asked Sima Qian, his son, to continue and complete the work. Sima Qian became a grand historian in 108 BC. Then in 99 BC, a few years, 7 or 8 years after he became grand historian in the court of the emperor, he was condemned by emperor to be castrated, to suffer castration. After he tried to defend a general who was surrounded Xiongnu. In the following years, Sima Qian served as a palace secretary, very much like a palace eunuch, and he continued, and before his death, he finished Shi Ji. Now this is Shi Ji. Now what does Sima Qian want to achieve in writing his book? In his own words, he wants to examine all that concerns heaven and the human, to comprehend the changes of the past and the present, and to create a style of my own. Now, we will talk about how he tried to examine all that concerns heaven and human, and to comprehend the changes of the past and present. But now, let me tell you that as an individual, as a historian, Sima Qian made this enormous achievement in creating a style of his own, and his style of writing history was inherited, was followed by the following Chinese generation, Chinese historians in the following 2,000 years. I like this stamp made by the Chinese issued in 1994. That's Sima Qian's own words. 就天人之际，通古今之变，成一家之言，那是对我所期。Now, in Shi Ji, there are 5 large sections. First, basic annals. Second, chronological tables. Third, treatise. Fourth, hereditary houses. And fifth, biologies or accounts. Later on, in the following generations, in the following dynasties, this style, basic annals or annals and biographies, become the style of Chinese historical writing. In Chinese historical writing, there are so-called first 4 histories. The first one is Shi Ji. The second one is the history of Han. The third one is the history of later Han. Then history of 3 kingdoms here. They were all written by individuals. Later on, histories were written by the professional historians appointed by the imperial court. So they are called 17 histories in the Song dynasty, and in the Qin dynasty it was called 24 histories. And they all follow the style, all follow the model of Shi Ji. Shi is a general history. All other histories are histories of a dynasty. And Shi is also a contemporary history of Han Dynasty. Shi is the most important source for understanding early Han Dynasty. If you check the table of contents, or you check the title of the two volumes of English translation of Shi, you can see that. I don't know whether you can see this very well. See, volume 1 is early years of the Han Dynasty from 209 to 141 BC. Volume 2 is the age of Emperor Wu from 140 to about 100 BC. So this is a contemporary history of early Han. Well, as contemporary history, what does Sima Qian set out to write about that? He wrote a preface to one basic annals for Emperor Wu, and he said that what he wants to describe there is Han Wu Di's 外让以比内修法度. Basically, he wants to provide a detailed account of the emperors drove back the barbarian tribes beyond the borders, and within the country put the laws and the regulations into order. He regarded this as the most important event in Han Wu Di's time. However, he did not write his annals of the present emperor, Jin Shang, emperor. That was written by others. However, in the different chapters in Shi, Sima Qian provides a comprehensive account of Han Wu Di's time, basically recording Han Wu Di's effort to defend the country and also to establish and consolidate imperial institutions. Now, if we look at volume 2 here, this is the age of Emperor Wu, and this is the table of contents here. Part 1, the treatise. Part 2, the biographies of statesmen, generals, and foreign people. And Part 3, the biographies of the plotters of revolt there. And for those of you who understand Chinese, this is chapters in Shi, some of them that was translated into English and collected in volume 2 of Watson's English there. It is in these biographies, in these different chapters, that Sima Qian provides a very, very comprehensive account of the tremendous military campaigns that Emperor Wu launched against Xiongnu, and he also provides account of the appointment of the personnel and the effort to establish those imperial constitutions, and also detailed account of the adoption of Confucianism as a state ideology in Han Wu's time. But today, I got invited here to talk about Shi because there's an exhibit at the China Institute's gallery, and I assume that all of you, or most of you, have seen this exhibit in the gallery, Dreams of the Kings. Now, of course, this exhibit really have a lot of objectives there, and through this object, the exhibit wants to highlight how these powerful and wealthy kings prepared for death and envision their afterlife to come. So I will talk about something about this belief and how the emperors idea about death and afterlife as recorded in CT. Now we know that the kings in the Chu kingdom spend a lot of will to prepare for afterlife, such as this jade suit. Now we should know that this kind of belief that there is life after death, there is afterlife in death, or the concern that how not dying after death. Let's say this. I will explain this. This kind of idea, very, very powerful, prevailing idea in the Han Dynasty. And of course, in the Han this time, he adopted measures to consolidate the imperial institution and brought all these vassal kingdoms under the firm control of the central government. And we know that the object in the gallery there is discovered from the tombs of the king in Chu in this area. And this is the Han, this is the imperial. And the king and the emperor in this area, of course, also share these ideas about life, about death, about afterlife. Yeah. So I like to talk about that. In the Han Dynasty, in the time of Han Di, if you check, that's a jade suit was made to serve that king of Chu, who reigned in 170 BC. And we know that Emperor Wu reigned from 140 to 87 BC. It's pretty much the same time. So they share the same culture, the same belief, and the same values. Now, I like to focus my discussion on Sima Qian's chapter called the treatise on the form and sign sacrifices. This is chapter 28 in CT. I will not read everything here, but I highlight some phrases. This is actually the last section of this chapter. Sima Qian is a historian. This is in Chinese. This is English translation. This, by the end of this chapter, he remarked, I accompanied the emperor on all these rituals. I entered the temple. I had the opportunity to study and examine the ways of the magicians and the sacrificial officials. This is his credential. Nobody had this experience. He was the grand historian. He had access to the imperial archives. And as a grand historian, he also had the opportunity to accompany the emperor to go on all his tours and sacrificial rituals. Gentlemen in later ages will thus be able to use what I have written. In Chinese, this is very good. 后有君子得以览焉. Gentlemen in later ages will thus be able to produce what I have written. And this is a historian's conscience. He recorded this for the benefit of us to understand what happened in the past and also try to understand what's in the mind of those people, what's in the mind of the emperor and of the kings. So, form and sign sacrifices were sacrifices of the greatest solemnity performed by the emperor at Mount Tai and addresses to heaven and earth respectively. I think we all have the general idea that by this time, the emperor of China is regarded as the son of heaven. He got the mandate of heaven to God. And after he got this, in order to express his gratitude, and of course, to assert his legitimacy and power, he have to hold these sacrifices. One is phone sacrifice to heaven, the other is son, that is sacrifice to earth in this way. He claimed to be son of heaven. This is the most important sacrificial rituals for the empire. There are detailed accounts of those Chinese legend, tales, and reports of those phone and sun sacrifices. We are not going to go into all those details. It will take about 2 hours to go through all of them, like how Yao, Sun Yu, and all of those emperors did those phone and sun. But I'd like to briefly mention about the account of Qin Shi Huang in the treatise of these phone and sun sacrifices. We know that Qin Shi Huangdi unified China in 221 BC, claimed that he is the first emperor of Qin dynasty. He believed that he had built an everlasting empire. He is the first emperor. His son second, grandson third will go forever. That's what he said. However, in this Sima Qian's account of Qin Shi Huangdi in Fengshan Shu, you see the detailed account of Qin Shi Huangdi's belief in tales of immortality and longevity. And this is the quote from Fengshan Shu. He actually sent men abroad to search for the three spirit mountains, hoping to acquire some of the wonderful medicine of immortality in the sea. But his hopes were in vain. When he had gone as far as the Sanding Hill, he passed away. Thus, the Qin dynasty fell under just 12 years after the first emperor performed the phone and sun sacrifices. The Confucian scholars loathed the Qin for having burned book of oath and book of document, and mercilessly put to death the scholars who expounded them, while the common people hated its harsh laws, so that the whole world rose up in rebellion. At this time, everyone began to speak ill of the Qin, saying, when the first emperor ascended Mount Tang, he was attacked by violent wind and rain, and thus was never really able to carry out the phone and sun sacrifices. This is Sima Qian's remark. This is an example, is it not, of a ruler who, though he did not possess the virtue necessary to perform the sacrifices, yet proceeded to carry them out. This is the account of Qin Shi Huangdi's phone and sun sacrifices. Now, there are more detailed accounts of Emperor Wu or Han Di in this treatise. This is the first paragraph in Fengshan Shu about Han Di. When the present emperor first came to the throne, he showed the greatest reverence in carrying out the sacrifices to various spirits and gods. In the first year of his reign, because it had been over 60 years since the founding of the Han, and the empire was at peace, the gentlemen of the court all hoped that the emperor would perform the phone and sun sacrifices and change the calendar and other regulations of the dynasty. Now, this is very important. Right? Emperor Wu showed great reverence for spirits and gods. But in the country, in the court, all those gentlemen hoped the emperor would perform phone and sun. there is a desire in the empire for a new beginning. As a very skillful historian, Sima Qian set this up here. And he himself participated in changing the calendar for Han people. Now, there's a very interesting story about Emperor Wu and the Han popular religion. And these popular religious ideas and practices actually continue through the following generations. Let's read this. At this time, about 130 BC, a few years after Emperor Wu became emperor, the emperor also sought out the spirit mistress, Shen Jun, and housed her in the Peace Tower in the Sun Park. The spirit mistress was originally a woman of Changling who died in childbirth. Later, her spirits appeared and took possession of her brother's wife, Yuan Yong. Yuan Yong offered sacrifices to the spirit in her house, and many people come to join in the worship. Lady Ping Yuan, the maternal grandmother of the present emperor, was among those who sacrificed to the spirit, and later her sons and grandsons all became famous and honored. And of course, Emperor Wu became an emperor, right? That's her grandson. So this kind of sacrifices seem to work. Thus, when the present emperor came to the throne, he treated the spirit's mystery. This is should be spirit, okay? This title here, with great reverence, and transferred her place of worship to his own palace in the Sunling Park. It was said that one could hear the words spoken by the spirit, but could not see her form. So, as a very young man, Emperor Wu shared this kind of popular religious idea in Han Dynasty. As a result, the emperor, for the first time, began to sacrifice in person to the fireplace. He dispatched magicians to set out on the sea in search of Master Anqi and the immortals of Penlai, and attempt to make gold out of cinnamon, sand, and various kinds of medicinal ingredients. This, we all know this is Taoist practice, searching for longevity. Then the emperor heard all those wonderful tales about immortals. The most wonderful one is really the Yellow Emperor as an immortal. That's what Gongsen Qian, a magician from Qi, said. The Yellow Emperor often visited these 5 mountains and met there with the spirits. At times, the Yellow Emperor made war, and at times he studied the art of becoming an immortal. But he was distressed that the common people criticized his ways, and so he beheaded anyone who spoke ill of the spirit. After 100 years or so, he was able to commune with the spirit. Now, 皇帝解战解学仙. At times, the emperor made war, and at times he studied the art of becoming an immortal. Is a new, very new phenomena that Sima Qian recorded in Shi Qi, really for our benefit. We all know that the Chinese believe that Yellow Emperor is the common ancestor of all Chinese. Yellow Emperor invented a calendar. Yellow Emperor invented governmental institutions. Yellow Emperor's minister Chang Tie created the Chinese script. Yellow Emperor's wife teach the Chinese people to make sound. That's the image of the Yellow Emperor as the common ancestor of all Chinese. That is also quoted in chapter 1 in Shi Qi, the basic annals of the 5 epochs. questions. Hold your question. After I finish this, I will answer your questions. That's the image of emperor. That's the image we all share, we all teach in classroom. Here you got a new image of the yellow emperor. The yellow emperor was busy fighting, at the same time he also learned how to become emperor. This is the tale told to emperor by those magicians. Further, more magicians come to the court. I need to further elaborate those tales. The yellow emperor collected copper from Mount Salt and had milk and cast it into a cauldron at the foot of Mount Qi. When the cauldron was completed, a dragon with whiskers hanging from its chain came down from the sky to fetch him. The yellow emperor mounted on the dragon's back, followed by his ministers and palace ladies, making a company of over 70 persons. When they had all mounted, the dragon rose from the ground and departed. The common people gazed up into the sky till yellow emperor had reached heaven. That's the tale. If you have studied the history of Taoism, you probably have seen a portrait of yellow emperor on the back of a dragon. Well, what's Emperor Wu's impression of these tales? This is what Sima Qian told us. When the emperor heard this, he gave a great sign and said, "Oh, if I could only become like the yellow emperor, I would think no more of my wife and the children than a cast of sleep." As an individual, as a person, we would like to become like yellow emperor. Then yet, Emperor Wu performed Feng Shan, that we talked about earlier, right? The whole empire, all those officials feel that we need to have a new beginning and believe that Emperor Wu had accomplished a great deal, pushed all the Shu back in those military campaigns in 129 BC, 119 BC, and also about Confucianism, set up the Central University in the capital, recruit all those talented young men to study Confucianism. You have accomplished a great deal. You should do Feng Shan. He did it, and it is successful. And he did it in 110 BC. As a matter of fact, Sima Qian's father got so distressed, so sad, he was not allowed to participate in that sacrifice. He died. Sima Qian died in 110 BC. In 108 BC, Sima Qian became Grand Historian. So we talk about that. In his own mind, Emperor Wu actually believed in those popular religious ideas, believed in it's possible to become immortal. So he actually has two minds about this Feng and Shan sacrifice. He successfully performed the sacrifices. So he made 110 BC, the first year of Yuan Feng. Feng is from Feng Shan. First year of Yuan Feng year. And of course, Feng Shan, as we discussed earlier, is such a grand imperial ritual. Therefore, all those ministers come to offer their congratulations to the emperor. The emperor, of course, issued this imperial edict. So this is the emperor's edict. In recognition of this new beginning, which I and my ministers have made, I grant to every 100 households of the common people 1 ox and 10 pieces of wine. Go slaughter the ox, enjoy the wine, have a celebration. And in addition to all those over 80 and to orphans and widows, 2 bolts of silk cloth. Let a general and nesting be granted to the empire. Indeed, his grand imperial which was so successful. And the emperor now indeed is a very good son of heaven. I should be generous to the whole empire. So this is his mind. His mind as the emperor about his own son sacrifice. What about his other mind, believing in immortality? And this is in Sima Qian's account. The emperor had succeeded in performing the feng and sun, and had not been troubled by wind or rain, like the first emperor. And the magicians now came forward one after another to assure him that the time had surely come when he would make contact with the spirits of life. The emperor was overjoyed and convinced that his meeting with the gods was near. He returned east once more to the sea coast, gazing from afar in hopes of sighting the islands of life. But there's no proof. There's no success. All those magicians, quite a few of them, several of them were recorded in Feng Shui. When they failed to prove to Emperor Wu or his ministers that they really could communicate with the spirits, Emperor Wu had them killed. Next, the magician come over pretty much the same power, the same tale, and telling that they have this magician power and could not prove that. Killed. Quite a few of them got killed. When other musicians come and say, I really have this true power to communicate with the spirits, but I have to do that in my own way, but I don't want to be killed. The emperor said that no. The previous magician, Xiaolong, was not killed. He happened to have eaten some horse but they were killed. So in the Feng Shui, this word we use. 莫验，未有验者，终无有验。No proof. There's no proof. You can really see those spirits. There's no proof. They will be immortals. This is the last paragraph in Feng Shui. Before the grand historians of life. Whereas the emperor grew increasingly weary and disgusted with the tales of the magicians, and yet he was bound and snared and could not free himself. For always he hoped to find one who spoke the truth. From this time on, the magicians would come to him recommending sacrifices to this or that deity grew even more numerous. But the results of all this are as you can see. Now, of course, Sima Qian said, no proof, no success. And we can see that Sima Qian himself did not share this type of concept. Thanks to him. That's a very honest story. We got this. 莫验，无有验者，终无有验。Rational Chinese always have thought about those tales of longevity and immortality. All right, let's go back to what China Institute's exhibit tried to highlight how these powerful and wealthy kings prepare for death and envision their afterlife to come. I hope my discussion of this account of Emperor Wu and the tale of Yellow Emperor as an immortal will help you to comprehend that in the Han Dynasty, in Han this time, the emperor and his powerful kings and aristocrats very much share the same. Sima Qian is a great historian, and he provides these accounts, this record here, for the following generation to learn about the past. 后有君子得以览焉. The gentleman in the later ages would be able to produce what I have written. So let's see how Sima Qian's accounts were used by the following generations. Now, Ban Gu is the author of History of Han, and he lived about 150 years after Sima Qian's death. Of course, he wrote this History of Han. These are basic annals of Emperor Wu. You read that annals of Emperor Wu, you will see that all those accounts of Emperor Wu trying to learn from Yellow Emperor as an immortal were cleansed. It's nothing. And Ban Gu actually praised him. And from this time on, this phrase, 雄才大略, or Emperor Wu's real gift. And again, this is a typo here, bold. I don't know why I have so many typos here, I'm sorry. It's a bold strategy, okay? 雄才大略 is used to refer to those great emperors. No, there's no account of that. This is one historian's attitude. But we know that in the following generations, historians continue to study this. Sima Guang is another great historian. He lived in the Song dynasty. Well, based on his reading of Sima Qian's account of Emperor Wu's all activities, not only performing sun sacrifices, but also his military campaigns, how he managed the government, so on and so forth. He made this general remark about Emperor Wu. And he concluded that Emperor Wu is barely different from Qin Shi Huang. He had all the faults that caused the collapse of the Qin dynasty, but was spared a disaster. Now, if you read this, if you read Zhi Tongjian, or comprehensive narrative for aid in government, and you will see that Sima Guang actually offered a very, very detailed comment. But that's his conclusion. Now, we can see that this is actually a historical conversation. Sima Qian provided the account of Emperor Wu and form and sun sacrifices, and also account of China's diplomatic activities and China's domestic affairs, and so on and so forth. The following generation read about it. But Ban Gu, for whatever reason he had in the late Han Dynasty, he basically wrote history of history of Han in the 70s, 80s, and also all the way to 90 AD. By this time, some emperors did not like the account of Sima Qian in the Shi Ji. So he dared not to criticize Emperor Wu, and he chose to cleanse that account, not recording any of Emperor Wu's belief in Yellow Emperor as an eternal. Sima Guang is there. Sima Guang has a very close reading, and Sima Guang lived in the age about 1,000 years after Sima Qian. I still respect his account. And this is a very important historical conversation. Sima Qian's Shi Ji, therefore, was praised as faithful record. by the Han scholars in the Han Dynasty. But Ban Mu, because he did not mention about Han Li's former son, and also his belief in popular religion in Chinese historical writing is called Yin Hui, or avoid mentioning. You should avoid mentioning the faults of the Buddha. That's a rule I want to follow. But we can see that actually Sima Qian, as a historian, really adhered to objective scholarship. And we also talk about that. He was a grand historian. He had access to imperial archives. He collected all these primary sources. And he also traveled the country. He interviewed a lot of people. He talked to people. So he very much paid attention to the accuracy of his materials, and he critically examined all sources and cross-examined them. Based on this, he made a fair and balanced assessment, and this really promote critical thinking. Critical thinking is not 21st century phenomenon. Sima Qian engaged in critical thinking. Sima Qian inspired critical thinking. Of course, due to the time limit, I cannot provide you in detail the account of Emperor Wu's effort to defend the country, drive off Shungwu, and also to build up and to consolidate imperial institutions in the Han Dynasty. But in Shi Ji, Sima Qian provided this. You read all those chapters, you will know that. However, when we study history, we study the complexities of history and personalities. And in Sima Qian's balanced account, we will also see emperor as a man, as an individual. Ordinary people would not have access to all those stories. Sima Qian had that. He was very close to them. He recorded that for us. Just recordings for the following generations to read, to learn what actually happened. And based on this, living in the modern time, we can have a balanced understanding of empire. And again, Michael, to thank you for inviting me here. Let me also make this link to your exhibit here, right? Let me say this, right? Emperor Wu, kings of Chu, kings of other kingdoms, they are all men of their times. They all share this beliefs. They believe, well, they want to prolong their life first, then they also want to have an afterlife. They all believe in immortality. They all share that tale of the yellow emperor as immortal. But the kings were not as wealthy as emperor, and they were not allowed to perform those sun sacrifices. Therefore, in our exhibit, there's more talk about the afterlife. By the way, this is remarkable archaeological discovery in China in the 20th century and the 21st century. The mausoleum of Emperor Wu hasn't been unearthed yet. It's still underground. Well, maybe Michael, you guys should work on this. When that got discovered, invite the Chinese to ship all those jade for us to see, right? Maybe more magnificent than those objective discoveries in the tombs of the kings of the school. Sima Qian is a great historian. He is also regarded as a great writer. It's a tremendous literary power of Shi Ji. Shi Ji provides a succinct narrative and a comment. It provides vivid descriptions and story. And Sima Qian also demonstrated creative imagination, and his writings are very, very interesting and stimulating. You probably have heard this Beijing京剧 or Peking opera, Farewell My Country Life, and that is based on the account in the city, in the basic annals of the show. Let's take a look at these. How can I do that? It's about 1 minute. Metropolitan Museum actually is having this show, Farewell My Country Life, and it's rated by Shanghai Peking Opera. And right now, all right, so you may go to check. It's a little bit pricey, but you can go to see that. Now, so that's what 项羽 楚霸王 sang, and that's exactly from 史记。篱笆山兮气盖世，时不利兮骓不逝，骓不逝兮可奈何？虞兮奈若何？ And if you read Chinese, forgive me here, I just want to read this with members in the audience who read Chinese. You will see the literal power of Sima Qian's pen. So after Xiang Yu sang that song, he sang the song several times, and later he joined the voice with his. Tears streamed down his face, while all those about him wept and were unable to lift their eyes from the ground. Then he mounted his horse with some 800 brave horsemen under his banner, rode into the night, burst through the circumvented to the south, and galloped away. Read Chinese. Very, very powerful. 歌数绝，美人何之？向王气数行相，左右皆弃，莫能了事。于是项王乃上马骑，麾下壮士其中这800余人，职业会为难出。此种say very succinct, very powerful. I also like to comment on this Chinese approach to the past. A lot of people got from 史记, it's called 思古之幽情. Thanks to the help of my good friend Dai Fang, we thought that this may be a proper English translation. Musing over historical events or figures, nostalgic, or entertaining a longing sentiment at the remote past. Now let me give you this example in 史记. Sima Qian, of course, respected Confucius, and he visited Confucius' birthplace, also visited Confucian temple there, and he remarked this way. When I read Confucius' book, I try to imagine him as an individual. When I visited Confucian Temple in London and witnessed the students learning Confucian teaching, I was overwhelmed by a feeling of respect and admiration for Confucius, and I was reluctant to leave. 想见其为人物 Try to imagine as an individual. Really reluctant to leave. 第一回游是不能去. These phrases were used by Chinese from the Han Dynasty all the way down to today. I understand that Professor Steve Zhang is teaching a course on Chinese essays. He probably has touched on this. That's the tremendous, lasting influence of Sima Qian's writing. So when we read a Siji, we should remember that Sima Qian may provide accounts of one individual in one chapter, but he also provides accounts of this individual in the biography of other individuals. So all these chapters are interconnected. And by reading them together, by closely examining their connection, you can have a comprehensive understanding of the Han Dynasty. You can also make a contextualized analysis. As I said earlier, Siji is actually the most important source for understanding early Han Dynasty. And even today, historians still use Siji as an important primary source. If you read Cambridge History of China, for the part of Han Dynasty, or you read the new history of imperial China published by Harvard University, such as Martin Lewis's book, The Early Chinese Empires, Qin and Han, you check it. They all use Siji as primary sources. Now, using Siji as primary sources, historians were able to reconstruct the history of Han Dynasty. And again, I have to apologize that I haven't given a very detailed account of Han Dynasty. But Francis Fukuyama, a very important political theorist today, read all those literature of Han Dynasty, synthesize this here, and let's see what he says about the Han Dynasty as a modern state. Among the characteristics of modern bureaucracy, according to Max Weber's classic definition, offices are defined by functional area with a clearly defined sphere of competence, organization of offices into a clearly defined hierarchy. Candidates selected impersonally on the basis of qualifications. Officials likely an independent political base and subject to strict discipline within a hierarchy, and a salary office treated as careers. The Chinese government of the former Han Dynasty fulfilled virtually all of these criteria of modern bureaucracy. And this modern bureaucracy was built and completed, consolidated during the reign of Emperor. And thanks to the accounts of Sima Qian, we were able to see that. Sima Qian is a great historian, and Sima Qian is a great writer. Personally, I respect Sima Qian the most. I respect him for his open mind, and also for his sharp eyes, and for his powerful pen. And Sima Qian had a lasting impact on Chinese historical writing, and in turn, he had lasting influence on Chinese culture. Chinese historical writing, also Chinese popular culture. Many Chinese simply read Shi Ji or read his book as literature. I myself also do that. So I regard Shi Ji as a lasting inspiration. Again, I'd like to thank Michael and Senja for inviting me to give this talk. To give a talk on the glories of the Han Dynasty. Indeed, there are many shining glories of the Han Dynasty. Of course, as a historian, I regard Sima Qian and his Shi Ji as #1 shining glory of the Han Dynasty. And I thank you very much for allowing me to share this thought with you. Thank you. And this gentleman here seems to have a question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So there was a reference early on about sending someone abroad to get ideas about the afterlife. And did they have access to, afterlife ideas, I guess, from West Asia? For example, you had the Bible in Mesopotamia, Old Testament. So was there any exchange of knowledge? And secondly, when you say sacrifices, what does that actually mean?
First of all, it's not to my knowledge. I don't think there's any exchange of these kind of ideas in the Han Dynasty. This is all divided. And by the way, first emperor of Qin Dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, and Han sent those magicians to the sea to seek for medicine for longevity, not for afterlife. Afterlife is what we see in this exhibit, right? Because there's no proof. There's no proof of immortality. And there's no proof of longevity. In Shi Ji, there's a guy who claims he lived probably 700 years. But after that, there's no proof. So then they focus on their afterlife. That is how to preserve the body. And have you seen the exhibit? Mm-hmm. Yeah, how to preserve the body, and in their imagination, even after death, the emperor, the kings, the aristocrats continue to enjoy the same lifestyle as they did in their life. So this is saying honoring the death as if living. So this is totally different from searching for medicine for longevity. That is called 长生不老, prolonged life. And in the tale of the Yellow Emperor, the detail was provided. The Yellow Emperor really get those medicine, therefore his life was prolonged. But the magicians really, they have the skills to persuade them. It took Yellow Emperor 100 years to do it. You have to be patient. Well, I think your question is that whether they have this kind of exchange of ideas.
The sacrifices.
Sacrifices, this is related to the Chinese concept of Li, is ritual. Then you also see all those jade, wine vessels, all those utensils show that bronze or jade. Those are the vessels used in these rituals. In these rituals, you have to be, since they are so solid, you have to be very serious. All right, you fast, clean yourself, and you use the best vessels to show the sincerity and respect of heaven. You offer sacrifices like ox, sheep, all these sacrifices offered to heaven, and of course a lot of wine. So those are called the sacrifices. Yes?
Yes, I don't quite recall when the theory of the mandate of heaven originated. You clarify that, but would Sima Qian have agreed with the concept that if the imperial dynasty failed to do a good job over a period of years, then it was justified to rebel and replace them with something better?
The idea of a man of heaven, or Tianming Ren, according to Confucius, really originated by Duke of Zhou Gun, in the early Zhou dynasty. The Zhou people rebelled against the Sun, then they built their own dynasty in 1050 BC around this time. Duke of Zhou invented this theory to convince the Sun people that their ruler was rotten, corrupted, and therefore the heaven now gave mandate to the Sun people to rule. So that's the theory. And of course, Confucius and Mencius later on divided that theory. So it's not very elaborate theory. Sima Qian, first of all, is a historian. And this historian, he recorded this event. He did not say this is the correct version. You must accept. He did not say this is the correct theory. You must open. His writing of history is very different from Confucius. Confucius also provides the Chun Qiu. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Confucius wrote Chun Qiu, right? Covered a period from 722 to 481 BC. Confucius died in 479. He said very clearly, I produce a history of Wu, and I will use this account of history to warn those potential plotters not to try to overthrow the system. The system at that time, you should follow all those orders there. So Confucius wrote Spring and Autumn or Chun Qiu for a moral purpose. At least he summarized the Chinese history as he sees it. And he saw a lot of moral lessons from that. And he liked to use those moral lessons to guide his generation and the next generation to build a better society or to restore the order in the early Zhou dynasty. That's what we understand. Now, if you ask this question, whether Sima Qian shared this conviction, I don't know. But he certainly was influenced by that idea. And by Han Dynasty, of course, in all these accounts, the emperor is called Tianzi, son of heaven. Right? Then you have to prove that. You have to prove that. You have the merit. Right? So he probably shared this idea, but in his account, you will see that it's very objective. And you see the account of those Confucian officials who made enormous contribution to the adoption of Confucianism as a state ideology in 130s. But as individuals, for example, if you check the biography of Wei Qi, Qi Wei Qi, and oh my God, you read those accounts, it's very much like the account of today's Chinese drinking party. They got drunk, they insult each other, they got offended. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering about in present day China, at the university level, to what degree is Sima is studied? Is it part and parcel of the curriculum, or is this strictly very for graduate students, let's say, who major in some aspect of Chinese history?
That's actually a very good question. For a long time, Sima Qian is not, Shiji is not part of the curriculum. But no any history department in Chinese universities with any self-respect would not offer any courses on Sima Qian's Shiji and others. For general education, it's very difficult to say because the language was 2,000 years ago. It's Wenyan, Asian language. It is not an easy reading for, say, young students. And also, as I said, Sima Qian has a brilliant mind. He arranged his materials, or he dispersed his materials in such a way. When you read them, you just have a feeling, you just admire him. It's a brilliant mind. And nowadays, the young people, what the young people are reading, right? And their reading habit. So you have to have that habit to really read this for years and also read different chapters, and you learn that these are interconnected chapters. It's not only this say you read one chapter, you will get to know that. Now you have to read a lot of chapters. You read the whole book, and you get to understand it. So in that case, I think not all Chinese students are studying this, but they ought to, they should. Yes.
Just a quick question. Is there or has there been an effort to quote unquote translate Shima's ancient Chinese to present day Chinese
Language. Well, the translation.
like in English?
Yeah, I know.
Of Chaucer's time.
Well, like the whole 知识通鉴 comprehensive merit to aid in government. The whole book was translated into today's curriculum, today's modern language. Well, actually, in my opinion, that's not necessary. If you learn basic grammar, you learn basic vocabulary, you learn this from a teacher, you can read it. And like what I just read with you, this is so beautiful. It's even more beautiful, more powerful than the modern language. I'm not aware about the modern translation of Siji. I know Bo Yang translated 知识通鉴, so probably there's no any modern translation.
Yeah, I'm glad I have the opportunity to hear. Thank you. Actually, my major in the college is Chinese literature, but I want to tell the truth. The college students, most of them have not read the whole Shiji yet. But we do pick some famous paragraph that I could read. And I totally agree with that the older writing in the Chinese classical, like the classical Chinese, very beautiful. The inside, a lot of the idioms we use until now, especially in the beginning, I saw Nong Shan Yang Qi. A lot of them is beautiful. But for the people, if you are studying the Chinese, but if you're not afraid of that, you can pick some paragraph and then move them out. They have a lot of reference book. But I'm not sure they have someone to translate it right in Taiwan. The formats, I'm not sure. But this one you show us actually is a traditional style.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a comprehensive Taiwan. China, if you learn the simplified, you can find different formats or something like that.
I actually use a simplified. My computer does not have the traditional. I'm sorry. I would really to use the traditional.
Yeah, they have a lot of so they continue this.
I should be, but it's a step. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So I have two quick questions. One is the influence of Sima Qian in Chinese history has been compared to figures like Herodotus or Thucydides in the West. And I was wondering if the style of writing, if there's any meaningful comparisons being made between those Sima Qian style of writing, which, as you said, is very complicated in the sense of having the character biographies as well as the tables and the lineages, and then like the Greek tradition. I was wondering if there are any interesting contrasts or similarities that can be drawn.
Yeah.
So that's my first question. My second question is, you mentioned that Suji is one of the most important primary historical source from the Han Dynasty, and that it was used for 2,000 years. But I was wondering if we know what sources Sima Qian drew from when he constructed the Suji. Because I was wondering, you said he's a very objective historian, and is there any way we can know, what sources he wrote from, so that we know whether it's actually what happened or is it some of the literary invention?
By the way, Andrew is my friend. He's my student. He's in one of my classes. He's from SUNY Purchase. And he has taken quite a few courses. I'm very happy to see him and his father. To answer your first question, I think, I don't know what you mean by meaningful comparison. Thucydides wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, and it's only about the war, nothing else. It focuses on the war. But that history, Thucydides' history, produced in the 5th century BC about the Peloponnesian War, has been studied, restudied many times by the Western generations. And ranking, the founder of modern Western history, the German historian, claimed that every year he would read Thucydides. So that's an influence in the West. Even today, people still study Thucydides. In that respect, Siji is very much like it. But Siji is a comprehensive history. Siji covers the history from Yellow Emperor. Now, there are two images of Yellow Emperor. One is the Yellow Emperor as the common ancestor of all Chinese. The other is Yellow Emperor as an immortal told by those civilizations. From Yellow Emperor all the way to Emperor, and also very comprehensive economy, military, diplomacy, politics, society, religion, cover everything. It's a comprehensive history. The second question, what kind of sources Sima Qian used? Well, if you read that very carefully, you will see that he used the Chinese classics, for example, Sun Tzu, the book of documents. Of course, he used Si Jing, the book of songs. And of course, he used Confucius and Analects. He also used the writing of other philosophers, one of the school of thoughts. He used, but what's important is I said this several times, his position is a grand historian. So he had this access to the imperial archives. That's an ordinary historian. And also, he traveled a lot. And he has a father who is also a historian. And he provides a very detailed account of his family. His father told him their ancestors were the historians of the Zhou. So the family has a long tradition, several hundred years. But to answer your question directly, he used all available sources at this time. He also did a lot of oral history interviews. He interviewed a lot of people. He said when he visited different places, he would ask the gentlemen, the elders in the village, in different communities, for the stories, and he tried to verify them. So he is regarded as a modern historian, very careful about his sources. There's another one, since you raised this question, for Sima Qian, is everything accurate? No, a lot of errors. But you have to finish, right? Andrew, right? You have to finish your paper. Before you finish reading all books, then you have to finish this before tonight 9 o'clock. And what should you do in this chapter? There's a principle called 信信疑疑. If I believe this is faithful, I say this is faithful. I believe this is faithful. This is the primary source I use. I cross-examine that. I interview other people. They also this is right. The other 疑疑 is that I'm doubtful about this. But I have to tell this. Without this account, I cannot finish this chapter. I'm very doubtful about this. Michael is also very doubtful about that. But Andrew is asserting this is absolutely correct. So I also jot this down. 后有君子得以懒焉. The gentlemen of later ages will have the opportunity to review. You make your own decision. He is inviting you to engage in the critical reading, to engage in this critical thinking of the sources and the events. Yes.
It seems to me that he's very much a strong character that he would dare to say something to get himself straight and punished. In CG, did he ever say anything bad about the emperor at that time? Or, I mean, was it, I mean, to give a fair account of the actual...
Yeah, let's just take let's take his account of these belief in the tales of Yellow Emperor as an immortal, and his detailed account of these relationship with all those magicians. You can look at this from two perspectives. One is that this is a great man, right? But on the other hand, you have to think about that. If emperor indulged himself in all these activities, he probably did not care about it. Who cares? His descendant. His descendants say that as a son of heaven, you are not supposed to. If you do that, you are not supposed to let other people know. So Sima Qian actually provides a very faithful account of emperor Wu's sacred form and son sacrifice. How did he go there? He went up there with one eunuch and another so-called card carrier. 3 of them went up there. What did they do? That nobody knows. Next day they come down there. That's what Sima Qian recorded. The whole thing, the whole process was kept in total secret. That's Hijaba. I really don't know to which direction the emperor really bowed. Did he kneel down? I don't know, right? But he did. He did go up to Mount Han and jot this down. This is what happened. Now, in later Han Dynasty, this Western Han Dynasty ended in 8 AD, and by 25 AD, the later Han Dynasty, Dong Han. In Dong Han Dynasty, is Han Li. He read Sima Qian's account. He did not like the image of Han Li in Feng Shan's Shu, and he said Sima Qian used this to slander, to criticize the emperor. So there's actually a lot of debate among the Chinese historians. But as I discussed in my discussion, if you see this as Sima Qian providing the material, the accounts for the following generation to understand the minds of the emperor at that time, this is a very useful account. And all those objects we saw in the exhibit really help us to understand, indeed, Emperor Wu believed in those things, believed in longevity, believed in immortality there. So the emperor Emperor Ming of later Han Dynasty made it as a account. Now Sima Qian wrote as the criticized emperor because Emperor Wu castrated him. And other historians say, no, you cannot say that. You really have to read the whole book. You really have to read all those chapters to see whether he was fair and objective. If you say he made false accounts, you have to provide evidence to prove it. Sima Qian's book became available in Western Han Dynasty. His grandson did that. Ever since then, most historians praise it as faithful record. Only someone like Han Li would raise a question like that. Of course, if you enter into that debate, it's an endless debate. It all depends on which perspective you look at it. Now, if we believe that Emperor Wu could be a very powerful emperor, a great emperor who made an enormous contribution to the consolidation of the imperial foundation of a unified empire, and some people may not like to see him as someone in Feng Shan, right, who's very crazy about those medicine, had shower of meditations with ranks and gifts. But as an individual, that's believable. Yeah, yes.
Would he actually burn the original script?
Yeah, that's, well, they say that. They say, some people claim that Sima Qian wrote that basic handles of Emperor Wu, or so-called Jin Shang Ben Ji, but now they only have a very short introduction, that's for sure. They say Emperor Wu read that and got very angry, either toned up or burned it. There's a tale of that. But most historians believe that Sima Qian provides accounts of Han deeds and activities and his beliefs in different chapters, but particularly in this chapter here. He did not write that chapter. That chapter was made up by someone else several pages later and put that in this chapter.
I was going to ask, what's the oldest known example of a complete the Shujing? What's the oldest version?
You mean the edition?
Yeah.
There are so many editions, yeah. I wish Steve Zhang is still here. He's the expert on the different editions. Yes, you have different editions. You have the editions.
Not the American, but the oldest.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Of course, Sima Qian died.
Right.
His grandson presented the book to the Han Dynasty, and then people got it out. Right? Then later on, you have different versions of that, different editions. By Song Dynasty, they
still are from the grandson. When the grandson published it, any of those original copies?
not to my knowledge. The original copy, no, not to my knowledge. And copies got to travel to Korea. Copies got to travel to Japan. As you can see, Watson actually used the Japanese version a lot because the Japanese scholar also studied that. So you have different editions. However, the edition I use is, in my opinion, is the best one. Because it has been edited work by the best scholar in China in the 20th century from Dickens. So eventually, this was. No, this is from Zhonghua Suzhi from China.
Well, thank you, Professor Yu, once again.